Alright, I usually don't do any video based on miniatures or any kind of paint or hobby projects I do, but I've decided to take a poke at something because I don't know how many people have done videos like this, and I haven't had the time or drive to go research YouTube to see if someone has. You probably have been on eBay before and have grabbed miniatures that are, old, kind of, decrepit miniatures. This is actually a really fine quality one by comparison. This is one of the original Battletech 3rd edition plastics. It's made of the same plastic that milk jugs are. I mean, I don't know why they're so collectible, but they are. They're first run miniatures pretty much. The metal miniatures made by Grenadier and Roparth are actually finer quality and older and more collectible. So anyway, this is not what I'm going to talk about. See, oftentimes you'll get miniatures that are pretty jank, and you'll get something that looks kind of like this. It looks like this, see? Like a craptastic miniature. It's just a pile of mess. But this is what I've gotten, and I intentionally bought this for this purpose. This is a battle mech, an original metal as well. It's got janky legs that are kind of disconnected from the main body. It has a main body. You can recognize what mech this is at this point. No, it's not a Mercury. It's a tiny little Hussar. I mean, I guess it's nice enough for some people's paint skill. I'm not going to rip on this guy's paint job because he actually landed the paint where he wanted to, even if it wasn't expert. That's one thing I do. If someone makes a paint job that doesn't look as good as my paint jobs, I don't trash them because, they're trying. They're not rocking out plastic men. I mean, after playing enough 40K, people who play with plastic men are the real enemies. People who paint like shit, they can improve. And I have improved a lot of friends of mine who started out painting like crap, and now they paint well because they listen to me. So that's a good thing. Anyway, we're going to go through the process of turning this Hussar from what we see right now into something you actually might be jealous of. I'm going to do the best possible job I can of making this miniature look great. And so this is going to be my first video about how to refurbish miniature garbage you get from eBay. Okay, so I tried putting these in some normal grade scrubber, some simple green, and lo and behold, they're pretty much still painted. They still have the paint on them. You can see the yellow there. You of course see the green on the feet much better. This tells me that this paint is probably enamel based, and probably has to be taken off with something a bit thicker than what I was thinking of. Now, since I've cleaned this and I've scrubbed it, and it actually has a few areas that have been scrubbed hard enough that, it's gotten any kind of gunk off of it, it's probably a good idea. I could use this, just spray over it with a bit of a light dusting of primer and go from there. But I'm thinking I want to strip this off, make it bare, retouch it a little, see what's underneath there, and then go from there. And here you can see I have the parts now out of the sludge. I had them roasting in a chemical bath for a day. And for the most part, they are cleaned off of their, where the actual... You can see how they're more metallic colored now. Take the bright light away because they're reflecting it rather well. The bare metal is a nice subject matter to start from. Having someone else's primer or paint job underneath that, there's a lot of questions. So here we just have the bare metal itself. I'm going to go through. This looked to be a very cleanly done model. It was actually sculpted very well. I'm going to go through at a certain point where these pin files are really good for taking off mold lines. It's a really well-cleaned model I have here, but it doesn't hurt to go through and file off the mold lines. Now, I have a friend who's so into mold lines, he'll go to any extent to destroy a mold line. I actually will almost intentionally leave half my mold lines on for various different reasons. You can destroy the model's detail if a mold line crosses through it and you have no other method to get rid of it. You can go through with an X-Acto knife and really delicate touch. This is a step where cleaning off the mold line just makes it look better when the model is finished. I'm not too hardcore about it, but I'll still do it, even though I'm pretty sure looking at this model, it was either one of the first went through that addition of the mold, or it was just cleaned very well by the original owner. Here's a fun little thing about when it comes to creating these miniatures out of this mess you get, sometimes you have to do weird things. Notice that I've cut the base in half, so the feet are separate. You'll notice that the body of the Hussar is a big old fat chunk of metal. And these are spindly legs. I want the spindly legs to harden and be in good shape before they get put on the big hefty model. Now, sad thing is though, those legs, you know, the holes are not the same size the way the leg is stretched, because you see the one leg is bent, the other one leg is straight. So what I've done here is I have them lined up against each other so you can kind of see where the hole's supposed to be. I'm not sure if I got it completely accurately even, but I'm close enough, and I can fix that. Now what we're going to do, notice how the foot of the one seems like it has a little bit of gunk on the bottom. When you're dealing with spindly parts, don't complain about it, just do it. Get out your green stuff, make a tiny little piece of green stuff. They're usually so small that they'll slide around if you try to get your hands wet. Just deal with it. It'll stick to your hands a little bit, but you might as well roll it together and get it rolling. That's what I did. I have green stuff in the base of both of these. The one with the post, this one here, this one actually went together just fine, and I put a minimal of green stuff in there, and it stood up just fine on its own. But the other one had broken off inside. So I couldn't just stick a post in there and assume it's going to be the same height as the other one. That's half the reason I also did this little funny thing with lining up the holes this way, is because, you know, when something breaks off, how are you going to make sure that when you repair it, it calibrates? And I can't just glue them all together with this massive hunk of metal. I have to make sure, you know, they have their own strength first. So I had to come up with something. And so sometimes you'll have to just think of something unique that you do to the miniature to make it accurate. Otherwise, this hussar is going to have a particular lean to it when it gets finished. So, yeah, we're going to let these legs dry, and then the legs are probably going to have those things at the base cut down even further, and then we'll put it onto the main hussar. Yay, I have a standing torso. Well, yes. The first part about getting a mech or any multi-part fiddly model up and standing is to find the legs and torso and hips together in one piece. If you stop and think about it, everything else like arms and weapons are secondary to getting this up and standing. Now, as you can tell, I cut down the metal base that came with the model quite a bit so that it could fit onto the plastic base. You'll even notice that I have a bit of foot overhang here. That's just because there's a very wide stance on the hussar. And it's okay if the foot sticks out this far. It's actually more important with your models to make sure as much of the weight of mass of the miniature is over the center of the base. I call that centering. Duh, right? Well, here's the funny thing. The hussar is just a butt heavy. Look at it. It's designed to hang over the arse end of the base anyway. So I had to mount those feet as far forward as possible. You'll also notice there's a little bit of sand on there. That's to help the glue stick, because otherwise the glue just, you know, it smears around and stuff, but the sand can help the glue form a bond and help it stick to the base in the model. You also want to make sure you don't get any sand on the model itself. It will stand out. It'll look like weird protuberances. Yeah, so this is the hussar in its very basic torso and legs form. I guess what, good for civilian use, I guess. We now have an assembled hussar. Yay! The funny thing about the hussar assembly is you'll notice, just looking at the front angle, putting on the arms the way they're supposed to, the arms are not naturally symmetrical on the model. Much like the way the legs are walking back and forth. For some reason, the hussar is swinging its arms toward the incoming leg. Okay. But here we have, also I've noticed that I've lined up the turret as accurately as I possibly can to the back end of the hussar, and the barrel isn't perfectly straight, so the barrel may need a tiny bit of straightening. But honestly speaking, if you straighten it as what it looks like, you know, column-wise, with the different tubes fitting inside the tubes that you get with the hussar, it kind of looks like it's straight. So at the mount there, where it touches the turret, it's turned off on one side. Then again, if you look at the hussar close enough, do you see it? The hussar's left side is actually a millimeter or two fatter than the right side. Just look and you can see it right there. And then there's a bunch of discrepancies with the model. That's because it was a hand sculpted model back in 1991. There's no CAD to measure this thing, and I don't think they made Battletech models with engineering tools. It's a fun little thing, and it's now assembled. You'll also notice the sand on the base has increased. I have a technique I use which I do not recommend for everybody because it is difficult. But you use cheap super glue and sand to make, before you prime it, texture material on the base. And actually it works pretty well. It soaks up primer, it soaks up spare paint. It also paints up when you finally get the model done. You want to base it. It makes the base look relatively natural. Also, because of the way the sand reacts, it kind of gives it the impression where the feet are pushing into the earth instead of standing on top of it. So that's a really good way to make your model look more realist. Of course, this is a Hussar, and you notice it has that atrocious, we don't want a model down here section of the model. That's okay. We have one light mech incoming, and now the time is to prime it. I'll be honest with you, when it comes to primer, I don't believe in heavy primer. I used to think that way, but all you really need to do is make sure that every area that you want to paint has a nice dusting of primer on it. You don't want to overdo it with primer. I'm going to use white primer so it turns out really aesthetic, and I can put a bunch of different colors on there, and the paint themselves will have their colors displayed. It still bothers me that the arms are not symmetrical. I mean, this one arm is definitely filling. I mean, look at it. Look at it. See those guys? See it? The arms are connected the way they should be to the body. They are. I didn't like try to bend them or twist them in any way, shape, or form. And this arm is way out here. Oh, well. So here we have the primed Hussar. Not much to look at since it's, you know, a priming job. So I put some color on it. This is nothing great to talk about really, but I want to show you something that I usually do. There is nothing wrong with taking a base color. You can even spray paint the base color on and then inking it. There are plenty of inks on the market. Army Painter makes a really nice line of inks that go on really well. Though they do clop up on the bottom, so you have to kind of watch them after 5 or 10 minutes and pull off the excess from underneath the miniature. But for the most part, it's a good idea to take a lighter color. It has to be on the lighter side of the spectrum, because your ink is going to be on the darker side of the spectrum. And that creates a nice middle tone like we have here. This started out as kind of like a very light bluish Panzer gray, and now it's still there, but you can see the detail on it because I inked it. This is an example of a nice way to start a miniature, but if you also are lazy and you don't want to paint miniatures, why not spray a color, ink it, and then you can make the base a different color and call it good. You might as well have colored forces instead of plastic army men or bare metal army men walking around your tabletop. I did that for the purpose of, giving this thing a base coat. You're going to see a lot more color on top of it. You'll notice this color is going to be like the bottom, the very shadow edge of the paint scheme, and it's going to build up in brightness from there. You always do that. You put your darkest color down first, or in my case, you can do the base coat ink combination I just talked about, and then go from there. Another thing I did this time around that I need to tell you guys about, if you don't have inks or you want a specific color of ink that does not exist, you can take this. You don't need this brand particularly, but you get Airbrush Flow Improver, and you mix that on a pretty decent ratio. The ratio I use is more like 1 to 2. There was 2 parts paint, 1 part Flow Improver, and you can flip that around if you really want a really thin custom ink. But this stuff is great for making custom inks, essentially. There is a miniature I bought recently that I was thinking about doing a paint job on it, but because I used this, I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick with just the base coat, the ink, and then I'm going to, put some details on it and call it good. This is this is actually the worst technique you could use. A lot of people have started using a technique that the Japanese started with, where they take a color and they use a very thin brush or a pen-like device to fill in all of the lines with an ink paint that goes into the little surfaces. I went ahead and just painted light stuff over the dark stuff. You can still see plenty of places where I had the original paint scheme popping through, but for the most part, this is looking closer to done. There's a lot to go on it. Some black ink, some white paint. The cockpit, if you haven't noticed, it's the same ink I used earlier to make the entire focus through, but if you look at it, I took some gold and some silver and did a little bit of stippling to make the windows pop out. And then, of course, I put some blue ink in there to kind of give it that glazed look. There's a lot to be done still. You can see where I'm heading with this thing. This thing should have been part of the crab family, now that I look at it. Fast forwarding to the finished product here. Here's the thing. Painting it, I use techniques that are pretty similar to other painters out there. So painting is not the focus of this video, but all the different furbishment that has to be done to appreciate the model. But yeah, I put a bit of insignia on there. Poland balls, for those who don't know why you'd put a Poland ball on the side of a Hussar. Shame on you. I did put some gloss varnish after I matte varnished it. I put some gloss varnish on the window glass there. It doesn't really make it shine as much as I wanted it to, but you can see it kind of does shine. And it gives it that glass look. This is the kind of thing you can do with crap that you find on eBay. If you find something that is a piece of garbage and you have the skills, you can refurbish it. No reason why you shouldn't. The world deserves more good-looking stuff as opposed to more garbage laying around. So if you have the ability to throw out garbage, recycle garbage, or refurbish garbage, please go do that. This mech wasn't too bad off had it been, kept up in its original form, but it had dust on it and various weird, like sawdust-looking stuff. And the paint job was basic. This is my finished hussar. I hope that if you're into miniatures and miniature refurbishment and you get things on eBay, don't let your hopes get down. It just takes some skill. It takes some practice. It takes more effort than buying something off the shelf. But once you clean the model and you check the model over for any kind of weird discrepancies, and then, of course, assemble it with... You'll have to use multiple different tools. Make sure you have your green putty handy. And I like to use all kinds of different sculpting tools and pin files and whatnot. You can have you can take something that looks like garbage and make it look just like you want it to, too.